Hey everyone, happy Monday. This is Nishana with your Monday motivation. Psalm 9 verse 10 says, "Those who know your name trust in you, for you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you." David had been anointed king, and the Lord sent an evil spirit to torment King Saul. Unable to find any relief, the king ordered his servants to find a man who played well. One of the servants remembered that Jesse had a son who was a great musician. So King Saul sent a message to him saying, "Send me your son David, the one who takes care of the sheep." Jesse sent David to Saul, and David entered his service. Saul loved David very much, and he became his armor bearer. So King Saul sent word to Jesse, "Please let David remain in my service," the king said, "for I am very pleased with him." From that day forward, whenever the tormenting spirit troubled Saul, David would play his harp and Saul would feel better. Now the Philistines had gathered their army for battle and camped between Soka in Judah and Azekah at Ephes-dammim. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the Elah Valley, where they got ready to fight the Philistines. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other on opposite hills with the valley between them. A man named Goliath from the city of Gath came out from the Philistine camp to challenge the Israelites. He was over 9 feet tall and wore a bronze armor that weighed about 125 pounds and a bronze helmet. He also wore bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. His shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as the weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him, carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted at the Israelites, "Why are you all coming to fight me? I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Jesse's oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, had already joined the king's army to fight the Philistines. But David, being the youngest, went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day, Jesse said to David, "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them to your brothers. And give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along, and bring back a report on how they are doing. King Saul, your brothers, and all the other Israelites are in the Elah Valley fighting the Philistines." So David got up early the next morning, left the sheep with another shepherd, took the food, and went as Jesse had told him to. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelites were going out to their battle line, shouting their war cry. Soon, the Philistines and Israelite forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left the food with the officer in charge of the supplies, ran to the battle line, went to his brothers, and asked how they were getting along. As he was talking to them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came up from the Philistine ranks and challenged the Israelites as he had done before. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in terror. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give that man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempt from paying taxes." David asked the men who were near him, "What will the man get who kills the Philistine and frees Israel from this disgrace? After all, who is this heathen Philistine to defy the army of the living God?" They told him what would be done for the man who killed Goliath. But when David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the men, he was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. Who is taking care of those sheep of yours out there in the wilderness? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle." "What have I done now?" David replied. "I was only asking a question." He walked over to some others and asked them the same thing and received the same answer. Some men heard what David had said, and they told Saul, who sent for him. "Don't worry about this Philistine," David told Saul. "I'll go fight him." "Don't be ridiculous," Saul replied. "How could you fight him? You're just a boy, and he has been a soldier all his life." "Your Majesty," David said, "I take care of my father's sheep. Anytime a lion or bear carries off a lamb, I go after it, attack it, and rescue the lamb. And if the lion or bear turn on me, I grab it by the throat and beat it to death. I have killed lions and bears, and I will do the same with this heathen Philistine who has defied the army of the living God. The Lord has saved me from lions and bears. He will save me from this Philistine." "All right," Saul answered. "Go, and the Lord be with you." He gave his own armor to David for him to wear, a bronze helmet and a coat of armor. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't fight in all this," he said to Saul. "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He took his shepherd's stick and then picked up 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them in his bag. With his sling ready, he went out to meet Goliath. The Philistine started walking towards David with his shield bearer walking in front of him. "Am I a dog?" he roared at David, "that you come to me with a stick?" He cursed David by the names of his gods. "Come over here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David replied, "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with only a sling and a stone. He ran over, pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath, and cut off his head, killing him. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah gave a great shout of triumph and rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. Sometimes your faith will look foolish to the world and those around you, but your trust in God should always lead you to action. Stop looking at what you don't have and use what God has given you. God cares about the small battles. Conquering the lions and bears in your life will give you the faith to fight any Goliath that may stand in your way. Take a stand rooted in obedience and trust in God. Reflect on your past failures and victories and surrender everything to God. He will always be bigger than your fears. So stop underestimating the capability of your God and believe that anything is possible. God, thank you for being with us every step of the way. When our faith wavers, remind us that true love casts out all fear. Remind us that we are never alone and our future will always look bright if you are in control. Amen. This was Nishana with your Monday Motivation. See you next week. Bye.